there are 39 states that make some special, specific provision for victims of child sexual abuse with regard to their civil statute of limitation. Because most states have recognized that this is a really unique type of crime and unique types of damages, and there are all sorts of dynamics at play that affect victims bringing this a civil cause of action. So, and victims of adult survivors of childhood sexual abuse is the one type of victim which you are most likely to encounter in your work whose victimization occurred in a state other than the one in which they are living, okay? Because we are a transient society. People grow up, they move away, particularly if they were sexually abused by their family of origin. So that's why it's important. This is whereas most of today we've been trying to tailor all the information to what the law is in this state. It's important in terms of child sexual abuse that you understand what the statutes of limitation are around the country. So when you deal with victims whose victimization occurred someplace else, you can sort of figure out how that's going to work, because the statute of limitation that applies is the statute of limitations in the state where the abuse occurred. That's why whenever I talk with a victim, I always ask them, can you tell me every state in which the abuse occurred? And they might say, well, it mostly happened in Pennsylvania, but it also happened a couple times in New Jersey and in Delaware when we had trips to the beach, okay? Just because the statute of limitations has expired in Pennsylvania, they might still have a valid claim that's alive in New Jersey or Delaware. And so that's why it's important to know every place that the abuse occurred. Some states have a what we call a fixed number of years from the time a victim turns 18 to file that kind of lawsuit. All right? And that's because when you're under 18 years old, you're termed to be a person under a legal disability. You can't enter into a contract on your own. You can't file a lawsuit on your own. Now, that doesn't mean you have to wait. It just means that if a child is under the age of 18 and they want to file a lawsuit, their parent needs to do it on their behalf. They can't do it on their own until they turn 18, and because of that, we don't start the clock ticking. Most states have some extra time in there specifically for victims of child sexual abuse. Some states say you have a fixed number of years from the time you turn 18. 5, 7, 10. All right? Out of all the states that do that, Connecticut is the longest. You have 30 years from the age of majority to 32 years from the age of majority to file a civil lawsuit. That means you have until the age of 50 to file that lawsuit. All right? Other states say we're going to not start the clock ticking until you discover that the abuse occurred. So a discovery rule, you know, how would that work? When I go back to the doctor, they do an x-ray, and what do they find? But they left some scissors or something in me during the surgery, okay? How can I sue my doctor for malpractice until I know that they did something wrong, all right? That's what a discovery rule is about. And how would that discovery rule apply in a child sex abuse case? Well, it will apply because what happens sometimes, you know, you all hear about repressed memory, and really, from a psychological standpoint, what it actually is dissociation. It is a defense mechanism. When someone is so afraid or so placed in fear, their brain sort of shuts down and blocks that out as a survival mechanism. And sometimes, over time, those memories might come back. And when they do, and the victim recovers those memories and knows that they were abused, when they discover that that abuse took place, that's when the clock might start ticking. Now, for the vast majority of victims of child sexual abuse, they don't repress the memories. They know about it. They know that it happened. But we know that victims of child sexual abuse, particularly boys, are much less likely to report the abuse as being harmful at the time it occurred. Think about it. You're 7 years old, you're 12 years old, and you might think, wow, that was weird and maybe kind of gross, but I'm alive, I'm breathing, I don't have any broken bones, I'm not bleeding, I guess I'm okay. But oftentimes the problems arising from child sexual abuse are not manifested until many years in the future. as people become adults, they are much more likely to have problems with substance abuse, drug and alcohol addiction, sex addiction, can't keep a job, can't stay in a relationship, anger issues. Oftentimes women are often depressed, more likely to be depressed. And even we found that the research shows that there's a strong correlation between child sexual abuse and eating disorders, okay? Now, I'm a pretty smart person, but I never would have intuitively imagined, oh, someone has an eating disorder, that must be related to child sex abuse, okay? And so, and oftentimes, people need, when they become an adult, they have to go through a couple different adult life cycles, and whatever their problem is keeps popping up and interfering with their life. And after that happens a couple times, they might think, wow, I need to go get help for this problem, for X, whatever it is. And they go to talk to someone, they go see a therapist, and the therapist says, oh, I think that's related to the sexual abuse you suffered as a child. And the victim says, well, you know, I always knew Uncle Billy did that to me, but I never knew that this stuff happened as a result. And in many states, they start the clock ticking when the victim makes the connection between the abuse and the resulting harm. When they know that the problem they're having was caused by the abuse, that's when the clock is going to start ticking, right? And then there are still other states that say, that have completely abolished their civil statute of limitation for child sexual abuse. Maine, Alaska, and Delaware have no civil statute of limitation for child sexual abuse, okay? And that's usually for cases going forward. Then we also have some states that have passed what they call window legislation, where even if your statute of limitation expired a long time ago, it's sort of like we're having a special, all right? You have a limited amount of time that you can file your lawsuit even if the statute of limitations has expired. And that happened in California, and it's happening right now in Delaware. Delaware is in the middle of a 2-year window, and that window is going to be open until July of this year. So if you work with any clients who are survivors of childhood sexual abuse, and they were sexually abused in the state of Delaware, they need to see a lawyer now because they only have until like the beginning of July of this year to file their lawsuit, or it will once again be time barred. So why is it so important for us to have a special statute of limitation for civil lawsuits arising out of sexual abuse? Well, and why does it take victims so long to come forward? All right? My experience has been that oftentimes, particularly men, are usually in their mid-30s or later before they realize the effect of the abuse or before they're strong enough to deal with it. And oftentimes, why don't victims come forward? Well, they might think they're to blame. You know, adolescent boys will involuntarily respond to physical stimulus. So if they are abused, and in the course of that abuse, if they have an erection or they ejaculate, they might think, oh my gosh, that must mean I liked it, right? I'm to blame, all right? So there's something wrong. I'm responsible for this. Or they think that no one will believe them. And when people do come forward, what we often find is once one victim comes forward, other victims come forward too, and they think, I thought I was the only one. And you know, there's strength in numbers. So that's why it's important to recognize why it takes victims so long. Now, we need to allow these cases because we know, even when it's 30 years later, when a victim discloses the abuse, where the perpetrator is still alive, we often find that they are still molesting kids. Pedophiles don't retire, all right? We find them 70, 80 years old in walkers and wheelchairs, still molesting kids, all right? And the kids that they're molesting today aren't going to be ready to come forward until 30 years from now. And so if we need to let the people who were molested 30 years ago come forward, because if we can have that person made public and other victims come forward, hopefully there's going to be another victim who's going to come forward who's going to be within the criminal statute of limitations, and they can be prosecuted, and we can make sure that the kids that are being molested today are protected.